The first player in Osu history to reach 25,000 PP. The only player to fill their entire profile with nothing but 1000 PP plays. The longest consecutive reign atop the Osu rankings, and soon, the most time spent at number 1 in total. That is but a glimpse of what mrekk has done since he became the number 1 Osu player back in 2021. 6 of the top 10 highest PP plays in Osu history are his, and for the longest time, surpassing him seemed impossible. After all, we're talking about someone who single-handedly had more PP than the rest of the world combined. But for the first time in a long time, the competition for number 1 on the Osu rankings is the closest it has ever been. Lifeline narrowed mrekk's lead to less than 2,000 PP, and has been consistently setting numerous top plays to cut down that deficit. Akolibed became the 3rd player in Osu history to set a 1.3k PP play and choked the PP record in the process. We're still a long ways away, but players have shown demonstrable potential to at least keep pace with mrekk's score-setting abilities. Records are meant to be broken, streaks are meant to be snapped, and rankings are meant to change. But who can possibly overtake mrekk? And will that happen anytime soon? In its 16 years of existence, Osu has seen 36 players rise above everyone else and achieve what all players strive to accomplish, becoming the number 1 Osu player. Going down the list of players who have risen the ranks to reach a level that transcends everyone else is littered with greatness and storied legacies across all of these players. Their rise to the very top has defined areas of the game that will forever be remembered for as long as the Osu community lives. But possibly even harder than becoming the number 1 ranked Osu player is staying there. And even harder than staying number 1 is staying there for a very, very long time. There are only 9 players in Osu history that have held the number 1 rank for at least 200 days, and only 5 have done so for at least 500 days. Go down the list and you realize that only 3 players have held the top spot for 1 full calendar year. CookieZ in 2017 and Whitecat in 2020. These are defining moments on both their legacies and the history of Osu as a whole. But what happens when a player comes along that is so astronomically far above everyone else? Every single conceivable record effortlessly fell into their hands. Little did anyone know at the time, but when mrekk took the number 1 rank for himself, we would find ourselves in that exact situation. We're all familiar with the numbers and the insane records he broke in the process, but I don't think something like this has ever happened before. mrekk took things one step further, because he decided to completely flex on everyone by mercilessly sniping the number 1 scores of the 2nd ranked Osu player. Like, bro, we know you're the best, and we know that you know you're the best. But dear God, give my man Lifeline a break. Out of everything that Osu has seen, this has to be in the top 3 wildest strays anyone in the Osu community had to catch. But that's not all. Akolibed decided to poke the metaphorical bear and snipe mrekk's scores as well. Once mrekk realized what he was doing, he chose to respond by sniping 18 of Akolibed's number 1 scores in just one day. 18 first place scores from the 3rd ranked Osu player were erased within 24 hours. What? This is by far the most savage way mrekk has proved that he was on a level way above everyone else. It just doesn't seem fair at this point. If he is doing this to the number 2 and number 3 ranked players, I'm scared to think what he will do if you manage to piss him off. You can't just do this and expect to get away with it. Otherwise, some smart-ass YouTuber will talk about it in gruesome detail. Wait. I could dive into the laundry list of accomplishments that mrekk has attained throughout his entire Osu career. I've done so in the past, but even then, it doesn't do mrekk's greatness justice. mrekk's time as the number 1 Osu player is truly different in comparison to everyone else. You don't just see that it's different, you could feel that it's different. Aside from the statistical disparities, the records he broke, and his insane growth, there's one thing that separates his time at the top from everyone else: his attitude. When you become the absolute best, it can be very easy to get complacent with where you're at. After all, you did it. You have shown yourself and everyone else that you are without a doubt the best player in the world. You have attained possibly the most difficult and prestigious accomplishment in your craft. There's nothing left for you to prove, there's no one left for you to chase, and now everyone is vying to take your spot at the top. As the saying goes, it's lonely at the top, and it's exhausting having to deal with everyone making you the target of their rise through the ranks. With that in mind, it's no surprise that people will eventually catch up to you. Even the most dominant reigns atop the Osu rankings ended because the players in question lost the motivation to continue defending the number 1 ranking. In fact, every single Osu player formerly ranked number 1 sits outside the top 10 because of this phenomenon. But mrekk entered with a completely different mentality. While everyone else before him eventually got complacent with their accomplishments and eventually were overtaken, mrekk continued to find the motivation to keep up the grind and decimate everyone with his unrivaled abilities. It's more than just the sheer volume and magnitude of the scores he was setting. You could feel a tangible difference with how he approached the game. He's unrelenting. He's not willing to back down for anything or anyone. And he's going to prove to everyone that he's the greatest player Osu has ever seen, whether you like it or not. To him, it's all part of the process, and the accomplishments that come with it naturally follow suit. mrek's mindset is by far the most powerful tool he has at his disposal. Paired with his crazy work ethic and motivation, it explains why he's considered the fastest improving player Osu has ever seen. That's the exact reason why his potential and motivation have no limits. He does so much that you have no choice but to take notice of what he is doing and what he is capable of. And that is why it feels impossible to take him down. And with how long he's been at the top, everyone's tastes can slowly sour. Seeing the same people come out on top over and over and over again can get really tiring. If competition becomes completely displaced and the ultimate goal of reaching the peak becomes overwhelmingly predictable and one-sided, people will eventually grow tired of it. It's no longer about seeing others succeed and rivaling those at the top. It becomes an issue of wanting those at the top to lose. And in recent times, Osu has completely succumbed to this. Since October 2019, Osu has only seen 2 players reach number 1, and at both of their peaks, competition for the number 1 spot was completely non-existent. Even Osu's largest tournament, the Osu World Cup, falls victim to this fallacy because it has been completely dominated by the same team for the past 8 years. People want to see the US lose, not necessarily because they have anything against the team, but because they win too much. 3 years ago, people wanted Whitecat to lose his number 1 ranking not because he did anything wrong, but because he was number 1 for a very, very long time. That's why mrekk overtaking him for number 1 on the Osu rankings was a heavy point of emphasis. And now, mrekk is dealing with the exact same situation that he previously brought an end to. You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And that's why things like this seem completely out of pocket.
Cannot see this game, but I still snipe this loser.
But mrekk didn't randomly just choose violence one day and wreak havoc on someone else. There's another reason why this happened, and that's because the competition for the number 1 ranking is the tightest it has ever been in a long while. Everyone is quickly gaining the skill necessary to eventually push for number 1, players are choking top plays in the PP record on a regular basis, and they are doing anything to narrow mrekk's lead over everyone else. Sure, everyone is still far away from even threatening the number 1 rank, as the gap between mrekk and lifeline is within 1800 PP, and it's become sort of a meme that whenever lifeline gets within 2000 PP of mrekk always comes back to stretch his lead again, and this repeats. This margin doesn't seem like a big deal until you put the numbers behind mrekk's number 1 reign into a new perspective. mrekk first reached number 1 on the Osu rankings on April 8th, 2021, and at the end of the day, the gap between him and Whitecat stood at just a measly 4 PP. Just one single play could easily change who stood at the top. But unfortunately for everyone else, this was the very last time that catching up to mrekk was in the realm of possibility. At the start of May 2021, 1 month after mrekk reached number 1, he was 216 PP ahead of Whitecat. It was a larger margin, but it was still beatable. But mrekk had other plans. By the end of the month, this 216 PP margin grew to more than 1.2 thousand. And the scariest part about this is that he kept going. mrekk continued to further bridge the gap he created between him and everyone else, and by June 24th, 2021, he was now more than 2,000 PP ahead of Whitecat. In just 47 days, mrekk went from ending the most dominant reign over the number 1 rank Osu had ever seen at that point to making any thoughts of overtaking him completely cease to exist. And ever since that day, he has remained more than 2,000 PP ahead of the number 2 ranked Osu player. It took 2 whole years for someone to finally get within 2,000 PP of overtaking mrekk when Lifeline was the first to do so on June 26, 2023. That's 732 straight days where the gap between mrekk and second place was more than 2,000 PP. Do you want to know what this looks like on a graph? I'm gonna be sick to my stomach. Since then, the gap between mrekk and Lifeline has hovered at around 2,000 PP or so. And this time, the competition for the top spot doesn't seem that stale anymore. For the first time in a long time, the race for the number 1 ranking doesn't feel like just a solo sprint. It's more likely than ever for someone to catch up. But what exactly needs to take place for that to happen? What will it take for everyone to narrow their deficit against mrekk? Obviously, for someone to pass mrekk, they will need to set a volume of high PP plays. So, I made a chart of the amount of 1.4k PP plays the 10 closest players to mrekk need to set in order to become number 1 on the Osu rankings. Lifeline is the only one sitting in the single digits, needing just 9 plays worth exactly 1,400 PP to overtake mrekk, and everyone on this list is within 20 1.4k PP plays away from number 1. By this metric, mrekk's lead doesn't seem like much on paper, but of course, there isn't a single 1.4k PP play in the game right now. While multiple players have shown potential to set scores of this magnitude, sadly nothing has transpired throughout the numerous chokes, so we need to scale this down a bit. 1.3k PP on the other hand is a much more likely occurrence. So here's how many 1.3k PP plays these same 10 players need to get in order to catch up to mrekk. And very quickly, you can see how far behind everyone still is. There are only 10 1.3k PP plays that have ever been set, and the only 3 other players that have a 1.3k PP play besides mrekk are Akolibed, Eterna, and Scytho. They all just have 1. From a numbers standpoint, unless someone goes on the greatest score-setting rampage Osu has ever seen, dethroning mrekk will not happen anytime soon. Even though the lead has been narrowed to the smallest margin it has ever been in 2 years, there's still too much that needs to happen for someone to catch up to mrekk. So, now what? Does that mean mrekk's number 1 rank will just remain unchallenged? Will he just remain number 1 until the end of time? Well, obviously not. Unless the game randomly dies in the near future, someone is going to overtake mrekk eventually. Both new and old players could rise their ranks, new reworks could completely change Osu's meta, and life can sometimes get in the way of playing activity. No one can truly know what the rankings would look like in the future, but that doesn't change what's going on right now. Let me remind you that once December 2nd hits, mrekk will officially hold the record for the longest time spent atop the Osu rankings. When that day comes, he will break CookieZ's long-standing record and reach a milestone that long seemed unattainable. And while we're at it, he might even extend this record even further. It's a scary thought that this is unfolding right in front of our eyes, and we shouldn't take this for granted in the slightest. mrekk took number 1 for himself, and after we blink twice, we're in the midst of the greatest peak Osu has ever seen. Every record that seemed unbreakable now rests on his fingertips. Records are in fact meant to be broken, and streaks eventually come to an end. But when it comes to mrekk's time at the top, it doesn't seem like that will change anytime soon.